3 words changed everything. It's your bridge. That was the message sitting in my inbox on a quiet Thursday afternoon, followed by one more sentence that hit even harder. Your land, your problem. Funny thing is, the man who wrote those words had crossed that bridge almost every weekend for nearly 20 years, and he somehow convinced himself that using something long enough meant he owned a piece of it. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 43 years old. I run a dairy farm outside Cedar Ridge, Minnesota, the same farm my grandfather bought after coming home from Korea, and if you'd asked anyone around town before all this happened, they'd probably tell you I was the last guy who'd ever start a neighborhood war. I don't enjoy fighting with people. I don't wake up looking for revenge. Most days, my life is simple. Milk cows before sunrise. Fix whatever broke overnight. Drink coffee that's always colder than I wanted. And hope nothing expensive decides to fall apart before dinner. But sometimes life has a way of handing you a decision that tells you exactly who the people around you really are. My grandfather used to say, "You never truly know your neighbors until something costs money." I laughed every time he said it because I figured he was exaggerating. Turns out the old man was just early. Back in the late 80s, this whole valley looked different. There weren't luxury cabins tucked along the lake, no fancy docks with wake boats tied up every weekend, no golf carts buzzing around like it was some private resort. There was just farmland, pine trees, and one deep ravine splitting our property in half. Grandpa paid to build a heavy timber bridge across it because moving equipment the long way around wasted nearly 40 minutes every day. A few years later, he sold several lakefront lots to families from the Twin Cities. Nice enough people back then. Weekend folks. They asked if they could continue using the bridge because otherwise they'd have to drive around the county gravel road that twisted through the hills. Grandpa shrugged and said, "As long as everybody respects it. No paperwork, no contracts, just a handshake." That's the kind of man he was. Dad kept that arrangement going after Grandpa passed away. Then Dad died, and eventually it became my responsibility. I never questioned it. Why would I? They waved when they drove by. Sometimes they drop off Christmas cookies. One family even helped pull my tractor out of the mud one spring. It felt like the kind of neighborly arrangement people always say America used to have. Then people changed. Or maybe money changed them. Little by little, those weekend cabins became million-dollar lake houses. The old owners sold. New owners arrived with luxury SUVs, expensive boats, and landscaping crews who probably earned more in a weekend than I spent on groceries in a month. They still crossed my bridge every Friday afternoon and every Sunday evening. They just stopped waving. They stopped asking. Somewhere along the line, permission quietly transformed into expectation. Last spring, I noticed several deck boards starting to soften beneath the tractor tires. Then, after one heavy rain, I crawled underneath with a flashlight and found rot spreading through several support beams. I knew enough about wood to understand this wasn't something another bucket of nails could fix. If somebody's truck broke through that deck and rolled 15 feet into the creek below, I'd be the one explaining it to an insurance company, or worse, to someone's family. So I hired a structural engineer. Nice guy named Martin. He spent half a day inspecting every inch of the bridge before taking off his hard hat and looking at me with that expression professionals wear when they already know you won't like the number they're about to say. "If this were mine," he said quietly, "I'd stop heavy traffic until it's rebuilt." The estimate came 3 days later, $19,400. I stared at that number while sitting at my kitchen table. That's not life-ending money, but it sure isn't pocket change for a family farm either. So I made what I thought was the most reasonable proposal imaginable. There were 6 lake houses using that bridge every single weekend, including mine. That made 7 properties benefiting from it. Divide the cost equally. Everyone pays less than $3,000. The bridge gets rebuilt. Everybody wins. I even spent an hour writing the email because I didn't want anyone thinking I was demanding anything. I thanked them for helping preserve something we'd all enjoyed for years. Explained the engineer's report, attached photos, broke down every dollar of the estimate, and ended with, "I think sharing the cost is the fairest solution for everyone involved." I hit send feeling pretty good about it. Then I waited. Friday passed. Saturday came and went. Sunday afternoon, I watched every single SUV roll across that aging bridge on the way home without hearing a word from anyone. Monday morning, I had exactly one reply. It came from a man named Bryce Calloway, the newest owner, the biggest house on the lake, and apparently the loudest voice in that little neighborhood. His email was only 4 sentences long. "The bridge is on your property. We didn't ask you to build it. Maintenance is your responsibility. We simply used what's always been available. Then I noticed he'd copied every other homeowner. That wasn't just a reply. It was a performance. I read it once, then twice, then maybe 6 more times. Strangely enough, I didn't get angrier. I got calmer, because somewhere between the second and third reading, I realized Bryce had accidentally reminded me of something incredibly important. He was absolutely right about one thing. It was my bridge, on my land, and that changed everything. If you'd like to continue. That afternoon I walked into the old office behind our equipment shed where my grandfather used to keep every receipt, survey map, tax bill, and handwritten note he'd ever thought might matter someday. Most people would have called it clutter. Grandpa called it insurance. He used to smile whenever Dad complained about all the dusty file boxes stacked against the wall. Paper remembers longer than people do, he'd say. I hadn't touched most of those cabinets in years, but suddenly his voice kept echoing in my head. 3 hours later, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by rolled-up plats, yellowed deeds, county surveys, and handwritten notes from the late 80s. That's when I found it. The original transfer documents from every lakeside parcel Grandpa had ever sold. I read every page carefully, then read them again just to make sure I wasn't seeing what I wanted to see. There wasn't a single recorded easement giving anyone permanent access across our bridge. Not one. Grandpa had trusted handshakes. Legally, every one of those homeowners had been relying on our family's goodwill for nearly 4 decades. Suddenly, Bryce's email didn't feel insulting anymore. It felt useful. He'd reminded me exactly where the legal line had always been. The next morning, I called the county building department and asked for a bridge inspection. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't tell them about the email. I simply explained that I believed an aging timber bridge on my property might no longer be structurally safe, and I wanted an official evaluation before someone got hurt. 2 inspectors showed up that Friday with clipboards, measuring tools, and enough caution tape to make me nervous. They spent nearly 2 hours checking support beams, moisture damage, and load capacity. One of them climbed back out from underneath, wiped dirt off his jeans, and looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Walker," he said, "you've done the right thing calling us. Those aren't words anyone wants to hear about something sitting on their property." The official notice arrived Monday morning. Unsafe for continued public vehicle traffic until repaired. I stared at that document for several minutes before folding it carefully and setting it on the kitchen counter. My wife, Claire, walked in carrying groceries, took one look at my face, and asked, "How bad?" I handed her the inspection report. She read it quietly, then looked out the window toward the bridge. "So now what?" she asked. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because I already knew the answer. "Now," I said, "I become exactly as responsible as Bryce wanted me to be." Claire smiled, the kind of smile that only appears when she's absolutely certain I've already made up my mind. "You're going to lock it, aren't you?" I nodded. "I'm going to protect my property." Tuesday morning, I borrowed heavy commercial chains from a local contractor, bought industrial padlocks that looked like they belonged on a prison gate, installed 4 security cameras covering every angle of the bridge, then mounted 2 bright red county-approved unsafe structure signs where nobody could possibly miss them. By noon, the bridge looked less like a scenic shortcut and more like the entrance to a restricted construction site. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, I heard tires sliding across gravel. Bryce jumped out of a black SUV before the engine even stopped running. His face was already red. "What the hell is this?" he yelled while marching toward the chain. I stayed where I was, leaning against the fence with a coffee mug in my hand. "County condemnation," I answered calmly. "Bridge failed inspection." He grabbed the chain and shook it. "Take this off." "Can't." "You absolutely can." "No," I said. "I legally can't." He stared at the signs, then back at me. "I've got dinner reservations. Hope they're worth the extra drive." His jaw tightened. "You're doing this because of one email?" I shrugged. "No, Bryce. I'm doing this because the county says the bridge isn't safe. Remember? My bridge. My responsibility." He didn't like hearing his own words repeated back to him. "You're being petty." "Actually," I answered, "I'm being compliant." For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he climbed back into his SUV hard enough to slam the door so violently I thought the window might crack. That evening, every homeowner on the lake called. Some were angry. Some sounded genuinely confused. One older couple even apologized, explaining they'd never seen Bryce's email because they rarely checked that account. I listened politely to everyone, but my answer never changed. The bridge stays closed until it's repaired. Wednesday morning, my attorney, Daniel Mercer, came out to the farm. We'd gone to high school together before he escaped small-town life for law school and eventually came back because, according to him, city clients were exhausting. He spread every deed and survey across my dining room table, spent almost an hour reading through everything, then leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You know what's interesting?" he said. "These people don't actually have access rights." "That's what I thought." "Better than that," he continued. "If you wanted to grant permanent legal access now, you could negotiate entirely new easement agreements." I looked at him for a second before asking, "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said, "your grandfather gave away a favor. He never gave away the property rights." We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting formal easement contracts, 15-year renewable agreements, monthly access fees, shared maintenance obligations, strict liability clauses, immediate suspension after repeated non-payment, everything written clearly enough that nobody could pretend they misunderstood it later. When Daniel finished printing the paperwork, he slid the stack across the table. "What are you thinking for monthly access?" I hesitated. Honestly, I hadn't even considered making money from any of this until that moment. Then I remembered something Grandpa once told me after lending equipment to a neighbor who returned it broken. Free things are usually respected the least. I looked back at Daniel. $900 a month per property. He raised one eyebrow. "That's substantial. So, is rebuilding a bridge." "Fair enough." The letters went out by certified mail the next morning. They explained exactly what had happened, attached copies of the county inspection, included proposed easement contracts, and clearly stated that access would resume once agreements were signed and reconstruction was complete. I expected lawsuits. Instead, I got silence. For almost a week. During that week, the bridge became the most talked-about thing in Cedar Ridge. Farmers discussed it at the feed store. Waitresses overheard conversations in the diner. Even our mail carrier asked whether the rumors were true. Apparently, someone had posted photos of the chained bridge online. The comments exploded. Half the internet thought I was a greedy farmer holding rich homeowners hostage. The other half believed I'd finally stopped being taken advantage of. I tried not to read them, but curiosity always wins eventually. Then our local newspaper called asking if I'd comment on the bridge dispute. I almost declined. Then I remembered Bryce had publicly copied everyone on that email as if he expected applause, so I simply told the reporter the truth. I offered to split repair costs evenly. They declined. The county condemned the bridge. I'm following the law. That was it. No insults, no accusations, just facts. The article came out Friday morning with a headline that practically wrote itself. By Saturday afternoon, the story had spread through regional Facebook groups, and suddenly Bryce wasn't enjoying nearly as much support as he'd expected. People kept asking the same question over and over. If 6 families used the bridge every weekend for years, why wouldn't they help repair it? Bryce finally called Sunday evening. His voice sounded different now, less confident, more irritated than angry. "Let's be reasonable," he said. "We'll split the repair bill 50-50. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. That offer would have been wonderful 8 days ago. So what now? Now the contracts stand." He let out a long sigh. "You'd seriously rather lose access than compromise?" I looked through the kitchen window toward the empty bridge glowing under the setting sun. "No," I answered quietly. "I'd rather have neighbors who understand the difference between generosity and obligation." The line stayed silent for several seconds before Bryce muttered, "This isn't over." I set the phone down without another word, because deep down I knew something he still hadn't figured out. The hardest part wasn't convincing one stubborn man. The hardest part was waiting for the other 5 families to decide whether following him had really been worth the cost. The first crack in Bryce's little alliance didn't happen because of me. It happened because reality has a way of wearing people down faster than pride ever can. Memorial Day weekend rolled around, the unofficial start of summer at the lake, and instead of crossing my bridge in 4 easy minutes, 6 families spent nearly 45 minutes winding around dusty county roads every single trip. Kids got carsick. Boats arrived late at the launch. Grocery runs became half-day errands. One afternoon, I watched a line of expensive SUVs creeping along the gravel road from the ridge above my pasture, raising clouds of dust so thick you could barely see the last vehicle. I remember thinking, all this because nobody wanted to split a repair bill. 3 days later, my attorney called. "You've got your first signature." Then another one arrived the next morning. By the end of the week, 3 of the 6 homeowners had signed the easement agreements without changing a single word. They even included handwritten notes saying they should have handled things differently from the beginning. I respected that. Owning a mistake isn't easy, especially after everyone in town already knows about it. The remaining holdouts were Bryce and two families who had followed his lead from the start. But pressure inside that little lakeside neighborhood was growing every day. The people who had signed wanted construction to begin. The people who hadn't signed were now the only reason the bridge stayed closed. That's when the phone calls between neighbors started turning into arguments. I didn't hear most of them, of course, but small towns have a funny way of passing information around. One contractor told me Bryce's next-door neighbor blamed him for ruining their holiday. A waitress at the diner overheard someone saying Bryce's wife was tired of spending every weekend driving the long route because of one stupid email. Then, about 2 weeks later, Bryce himself pulled into my driveway again. This time there was no shouting, no dramatic entrance, no slamming doors. He simply stood beside his SUV while his attorney walked over carrying a folder. My client would like to reopen negotiations, the lawyer said professionally. Daniel, who happened to be with me that morning reviewing construction bids, answered before I could. The contracts are still available, Bryce finally spoke. We'll pay half the repairs. I looked at him for a long moment. Bryce, this stopped being about repair costs the day you told me the bridge wasn't your responsibility. He looked away. For the first time since we'd met, he didn't seem angry. He looked tired, really tired. My wife says I'm an idiot, he admitted quietly. I couldn't help smiling. Sounds like she's an honest woman. Even Bryce laughed at that, just for a second. Then he signed. Within another month, the paperwork was complete. Permits were approved, and the old timber bridge that my grandfather had built with borrowed equipment and volunteer neighbors was carefully dismantled. I stood there during demolition longer than I expected to. Part of me hated seeing it disappear. That bridge carried more than vehicles. It carried memories. Grandpa waving from his tractor. Dad teaching me how to back up a hay wagon without clipping the railing. Fishing with my younger brother before cancer took him far too young. 35 years of family history disappeared, one beam at a time. But sometimes preserving the future means letting go of the past. The new bridge went up that fall. Steel beams, reinforced concrete deck, modern guardrails. Strong enough to outlive me if somebody keeps maintaining it properly. The access agreements now require shared inspections, reserve maintenance funding, and automatic contributions every month. Nobody argues about whose responsibility it is anymore, because the responsibility is finally written down instead of depending on someone's generosity. A local real estate agent later told me every lake property increased in value because buyers loved having guaranteed legal access across a brand new bridge. Ironically, the people who fought the hardest against pain ended up benefiting the most financially. Life has a strange sense of humor like that. As for Bryce, we still see each other from time to time. He drives across that bridge almost every weekend. Sometimes we make eye contact, sometimes we don't. We aren't friends, but we aren't enemies anymore either. We've settled into something quieter. Mutual respect earned the hard way. Looking back now, I didn't think the bridge was ever the real issue. Money wasn't the real issue either. The real problem was entitlement. When kindness lasts long enough, some people stop seeing it as kindness. They start seeing it as an obligation. They forget that every favor still belongs to the person giving it. Grandpa once trusted a handshake because that generation believed character was stronger than contracts. I still believe character matters. But now I also believe good fences, good records, and good lawyers have their place. They don't replace trust. They protect it from people who no longer deserve it. So let me ask you this. If you had been in my position, would you have accepted Bryce's original offer to split the repair bill and forgotten the whole thing? Or would you have done exactly what I did and turned a decades-old favor into a legally protected agreement before opening that bridge again? I'm genuinely curious where you draw that line, because I've heard people argue both sides ever since this happened. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you honestly would have done, and if you've ever had neighbors mistake your kindness for weakness. I'd love to hear your story too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.